Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 2021 Female Founders Fund virtual discussion around M&A Trends. My name is Anu Dougal, founding partner at Female Founders Fund, a leading source of institutional capital for female founders raising seed rounds. Today, I'm going to be speaking with industry experts Kellen Grantham, Senior Director of Corporate Development and Partnerships at Target, and Betsy Bluestone, Commercial Discovery Leader at P&G Ventures. They're going to talk about exciting spaces and categories that large consumer goods companies are tracking, from sustainability and skincare to sleep and sexual health. Following the discussion, we'll be taking audience Q&A. Thank you so much for everyone who submitted a question during registration. And we're ready to start. So let's do this. Welcome, Betsy and Kellen. Great to have you both on here. And like I was saying earlier, can't believe it's been a full year plus since we did this last year. To get started, would love to have you both talk a little bit about your backgrounds and your roles and responsibilities at your companies. So Kellen, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Anu, thank you again for hosting this. Female Founders Fund in general, thanks for having us. And everyone that's in attendance, thanks for joining. Apparently, Betsy and I did an okay job if you invited us back, so appreciate that. I'm a senior director at Target in our corporate development and enterprise partnerships team. So I've been with the group for 9 years, always in that area. And we focus on acquisitions, investments, partnerships, and the rare divestiture when we have one. So that means in the last year in 2020, where we thought the start of the year looked like a lot of bankruptcies that were going to happen, actually ended up being a pretty eventful year for us. And we acquired Deliv, which is a supply chain technology company. We announced that we will be doing a partnership with Ulta for store-in-stores that will launch this fall. And we just completed the sale of a subsidiary of ours, dermstore.com. So our team's responsible for all of those initiatives. And prior to Target, I was at General Mills for a handful of years, also working in their corporate development group. So I have a little bit of a CPG background and originally from Michigan. So I thought I should go from a cold state to colder by moving to Minnesota. So thanks again for having me.
Great. Thanks so much, Kellen. Betsy?
So good to see you guys. I'm missing the hug.
Yeah.
So as Anu said, my name is Betsy Bluestone, and I am the Senior Director of Scouting and Partnerships at P&G Ventures. And P&G Ventures is really a startup studio within P&G where we build brands and businesses outside of the core categories where P&G currently competes. I personally am responsible for finding new technologies and brands and capabilities and talent for P&G Ventures. And background, I have been at P&G my entire career. I've worked pretty much every business, most functions. I guess the sort of red thread that ties through my career is that I have been involved in innovation in one way or another pretty much the entire time that I've been at Procter.
Great. And also, maybe you can mention a little bit about your diversity focus as well.
Sure. So at P&G Ventures, we are really focused on broadening the networks. So our business is really based on, we started with consumer understanding and then, go deep to find technology, whether that's in a startup or an accelerator or, it's found inside a lab somewhere. And one of the things that we noticed early on was that we just were not reaching the broad audience that we wanted to. So not reaching female founders, not reaching founders of color. And so we have spent over the last couple of years really working on our network and figuring out, where are the right places that we need to be and show up so that diverse founders are able to know, kind of what we're looking for and can connect with us.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So Kellen, let's move into partnerships and would love to hear, from your perspective, what are some of the key attributes that you look for as you're evaluating potential partnership opportunities?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Target's very, very thoughtful when it comes to when we acquire, when we partner, when we invest. And it all starts with our strategy. So does the company align with our strategy? Is it a capability or a business that fills or meets our strategy? And does it align with our values? So we've made a big push this year to be America's safest place to shop. We are trying to be as inclusive as possible. And is it something that aligns really with our values and how we're showing up for, we call them the guests, but the people that shop at Target today. So in general, it really leads with our strategy, but some things that we think about specifically is if it's on the brand side, consumer facing, is it a strong brand? Does it have a loyal following? How's the growth been? Is it maybe not profitable, but do we believe it could be profitable at some point? And how does it fit into our brand strategy overall? On the capability side, it's really, can it scale with Target? Does it fit within our roadmaps as well? And even on the brand side as well, does it scale with us? We have 1,900 stores. You might not be in 1,900 day one, but there's that potential. And so can you grow with us? Can we help you grow? And really just how do we align together?
Great, thanks. Betsy, what about from your perspective, as you're looking at potential partnership opportunities, what are a few things that come to mind that are important?
Yeah, I'm going to answer this two ways and kind of give you the view of broader P&G and then what that is within Ventures, because it is a little bit different. When you think about our existing business units, our acquisitions are almost always really targeted to enable us to stretch to new benefit spaces while staying sort of close to the core of whatever that category is. So when you think about an example like, in our deodorant business, when we bought Native, it allowed us to add a natural offering to that business. And that's was really important because we didn't think Secret or Old Spice could stretch their equity effectively enough to be able to reach the needs of that consumer. So really kind of filling a white space. Another example on the P&G side, if you think about Walker & Company's Bevel brand. So Bevel enabled us to take our grooming business to new consumers and new benefit areas beyond where we thought Gillette could really excel. So on the sort of P&G side, that's really where we focus almost exclusively from a acquisition perspective. Ventures is a little bit different. In Ventures, we're all about the science. So we are starting with, does it truly solve the consumer pain point? Is there consumer noticeable superiority? Those are the first questions that we ask when we are looking at a brand or we are looking at a technology. And then from there, we start to figure out, can we build a moat around that? Can we create something that is difficult for others to follow? And really our point of view there is driven from the fact that it's our job to build billion-dollar brands. So that's pretty hard to do if you don't have something that is defensible. And so, it's those types of attributes that when we're looking at a new business or a new technology that we're thinking through is, can we get this to be the size of a business that would be meaningful for P&G?
That's super helpful. And in terms of the actual process, founders are often saying that, whether it's a partnership or an acquisition, the actual process ends up taking years, definitely months. And so Kellen, would love to just hear, how should founders think about that in terms of getting to know, someone who could be a potential partner or acquirer early on?
Sure, it's a good question, and you're right to say that it can take a while because that's true. I think there's several ways you can partner with Target. The kind of most obvious is a brand that we might carry on shelf, and that's something that can take months to a year and a half, or more, and it depends on the merchant's needs. And when they're reviewing a business, there's some major transitions a year. It's a pretty standard retail calendar that a lot of our competitors also have, but some major transitions in different sets throughout the year. So if you get in on that timeline, but also just depending on the lead times of the category, even just we're a big company, so you have to get set up on our systems. That can take a while. So to be on shelf will take you several months probably, if not longer. And on the more acquisition investment side, I would say your biggest hangup is due diligence. And due diligence looks a little different for investments versus acquisition. And an investment, it's really, is this a viable company that we want to put money behind? Versus in an acquisition, it's, we're going to acquire this, so we're taking on everything. And so depending on the structure, depending on the size of the business, the stage of the company, due diligence can take a while. And so that's also a several months thing, not to mention kind of negotiating the contract. So I would say just plan that it'll take longer than you think. And especially when you deal with a bigger company, definitely takes longer than you think. But by way of how do you even get to that stage, or how do you get the intro to Target? Several ways in. I know, Anu, you do a great job of, and there's several VCs that are similar where your portfolio businesses really well, Target very well, and so then you make connections for us. And sometimes a connection is just a meeting, right? And it might not go anywhere. Sometimes, I think you've introduced me to a few that check in with me every 6 to 12 months just to say, hey, you want an update on my business? And we want that. It might lead to an intro to a buyer and might lead to even more things. So I think having a strong VC partner that's actually invested in your business and truly operates with you is super helpful. If you find a way to our merchants, there's several ways in, but they a lot of times will bring brands to us. They're always out searching for the latest and greatest. If you are not a brand and you're more on the service side, we also have business line owners that are also always looking for the latest technologies and whatnot. And if they think, hey, we might want to invest in this company, or we might think about acquiring, then it comes over on our side. And then I think I said this last year as well. I'm not advocating for or against, but if you are a brand and you want to get on shelf at Target, there are vendor reps. They're usually former Targeteers that they have offices very close to ours. They know Target very well. They speak our language. They can explain to you all the random things that are in our terms and conditions. They cost money. They will charge you a fee for either based on sales or COGS, something like that, but they will get you that introduction you might also need. So there's several ways in. It just depends what you're looking for, and we're always happy to take the call.
Perfect. No, that's super, super helpful, and a couple great ideas for founders who are listening in. So obviously, a lot has changed in the world in the last year plus since we did this at Neue House. And so curious, Betsy, from your perspective, how has your strategy or process changed over the past 12 months? Any examples of new brands or startups that you have worked with over the course of the past year?
Yeah, no doubt it has been a tough year in many cases to be a founder, particularly an early stage founder who's trying to get their first seed. And so, one of the things that we really focused on was access. And particularly, you asked earlier about our diversity strategy and work that we're doing to make sure we're connecting with female founders and founders of color. Well, when you kind of look back on 2020, the history books will report that, in fact, venture capital, investments were up last year, up like 13%. It's just that wasn't distributed very evenly. And I guess that's always the case, but particularly poignant last year, and a lot of news about that decline, especially for female only founded businesses that I think dropped to like 2.2%, something like that. So pretty tough. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about this last year and what we have focused on is access. And so I think there is a silver lining in this, that we can do this and you can participate in a lot more events and a lot more learning and a lot more, you can pitch a lot more often, and I can hear a lot more pitches. And so what we've really tried to do is sort of through the wonders of virtual communication, we have opened up access, so that we see more stuff, and people can ask us questions, and we've done mentoring programs. And so really just, kind of a grassroots, how do we enable more people to have access to venture building resources that they need? And we've doubled down on that in the last year, frankly, because it was easier to do. You can reach a lot more people this way than, when you're getting on a plane hopping from city to city. So from that respect, I think it's been really positive.
That's great. What about you, Kellen?
Yeah, I think just piggybacking on your access comment, that's the biggest thing that's changed on deals for us. I think at the start of the year of 2020, all we were seeing is like, this company is filing for bankruptcy, and there's a lot of things like that we were seeing, and it didn't change for us of like, let's try to buy something for cheap. We kind of stuck to what's Target strategy, and let's focus on acquisitions that relate to that. That said, you can get so much more done by sitting and doing everything virtually in a way that I think, none of us would admit before. But even the last deal I worked on was selling our derm store business. It's based in LA. We're in Minneapolis. The buyer was in the UK. And a normal deal, there would have been a lot of time spent in LA. I never once traveled for that. And that was true across the board. No one traveled. There was nothing in person, and still got to a great resolution across the board. So just seeing how much more you can get accomplished. And yes, you're missing some of that in-person piece, but it's great because I can work on that and not have to be in LA, and also have meetings with startups and doing these other things in a way that I just think people weren't willing to do or didn't explore doing in the past. So that's been great. And just some examples of brands that we've continued, or businesses we've continued to work with outside of just the derm store deal. I think Natalie said she was joining to watch, but Winky Lux is one that we launched, I want to say either like 2 weeks before the world shut down or right as the world shut down. And for those who don't know, Winky Lux is this beautiful makeup brand that just launched skincare recently as well, and had end caps, these beautiful end caps in Target and Beauty, and with this like life-size lipstick mock-up. And of course it's happening as like the world shuts down, no one wants to go into stores. It's done incredibly well and strong guest reception, but it's something that we continue to lean in on because it turns out skincare and makeup still has done pretty okay throughout all of this. So it's just, we're continuing to merchandise as we were, and continuing to be the place where you can get all of your needs, from your household essentials to your maybe your pick-me-up items like a nicer beauty product. And so continuing to kind of do it business as usual, but in a way that's emblematic of the times.
That's great. That's super helpful. Kellen, when you and I chatted, I think it was last summer, I'd asked, what are some of the key trends that you're seeing in terms of consumer behavior? And your response was hilarious. It was exactly what you're buying at home. And so, whether it's sweatpants or, at home stuff. So I'm curious, we're now into 2021. Would love to hear, maybe Betsy, from you, what are 2 or 3 areas or spaces that you're excited about, or trends for the coming year?
Yeah. Everything that we do really is grounded in that consumer understanding. And that's how we start every single project, is figuring out who will consume and how will they consume. And for sure, this last year has been an interesting one. And I guess I would characterize it as an accelerator. So, for example, we've been doing work in the active aging space. And the active aging space has always been very important to underserved consumers. Not a lot of great, big brands that you can think of that are aspirational and interesting, that are, on that aging front. Well, boy, people wanting to age at home and being able to do that, on their own terms, and to be independent and all of that, really, really peaked this last year as people were saying, I'm not leaving my house. And so that's been a really interesting one where we've had a ton of activity happening in that space. Another really interesting one is food cycle management and thinking about things like food preservation and the amount of stuff that we throw away. And I think there's something about being in your house all the time that makes you acutely aware of how much garbage you're creating and how many times you're emptying the garbage can and all of that kind of stuff. And so, we saw this really for the first time where really being worried about waste became a representative. Pretty much everybody was concerned. Like when we talk about sustainability and things like that, sometimes it's a little bit more niche, or you have certain people who are adopting habits earlier. Mm-hmm. We really saw that pretty much the whole world caught up at the same time on sustainability. So that's another one that I think is really interesting. And then the other one is what we're calling balance protection. But as everybody has gone into this, sort of crazy cleaning phase, and I think, most of us have sort of tired of that now, however many, 12 months in. But there is this recognition, realization that maybe some of the stuff that I'm using to clean and stuff is not healthy, right? Or maybe not the best from the standpoint of having chemicals around my children and my pets and all that kind of stuff. And so there's some really interesting stuff that's happening there as we think about how do we clean our homes and what's okay to have in there. So big picture, I think there's some stuff that was kind of on its way, but this last year of people being at home has really sort of kicked it into overdrive.
That's great. What about you, Kellen?
Yeah, I forgot I had said that too. That's been my canned answer of when people are like, "What's happening at Target?" For the last year, I'm like, "What? We sell everything." So I'm like, whatever you're buying, that's what people are buying at Target. You're buying home equipment. You're buying. You need your home gym, all the things, but you're probably not buying a dress to go out in. So. But when it comes to just trends that we're seeing, I know last year I talked a lot about stigmatized health. This year, I mean, that's still a thing for sure. But I think one is this convergence of digital and physical. So I know you had a session with Bryn, the founder of Mirror, and just kind of that idea of having the product, the mirror, but then the service, the subscription of the classes, and that's happening in all the categories. We've really focused on meeting the guest where the guest is. So you're shopping online, you want curbside pickup, you want order pickup, or you want to walk the store, or you want your groceries delivered to you. All of those we can do, and we've made a ton of investments to modernize our supply chain in order to meet the guests where they are, and that's continued to be successful for us. We're seeing a lot of our partners are playing in this space. Disney, a huge partner of ours, obviously have had this huge successful launch with Disney Plus. They also have the physical parks, the products, all the things, and it's how do we partner with them on all of that. And so just seeing this confluence where I think a lot of people's behaviors have accelerated given the pandemic as far as what they're doing online and what they're comfortable having someone do for them that they may otherwise would have done themselves. And then the other piece, kind of broadly, I would say, is inclusive offerings. And that's things like 2/3 of American women are plus size. Are you able to get clothing that fits you, that fits your style even? In beauty, are you getting the colorways that match your skin tone? Are knowing more men are doing their personal care routines. Men are wearing makeup even. Do they feel comfortable to shop, and shop across the aisle? And even, and Betsy, you're talking about this on the diversity front. Are we having brands that represent our guests? And how do we get more diverse owned brands on shelf? So broadly, more inclusive offerings, because I think I don't think that's a trend. And I think people have really realizing that this is something that we all can be better at and improve there. So.
Great. No, that's super, super helpful and interesting. So Betsy, I know in 2020, along the lines of what you mentioned earlier, P&G Ventures partnered with the Vinetta Project to really focus on female founders. Can you tell us some of the insights that you've seen through that experience in terms of the founders, the types of companies that you've partnered with? Would love to hear that.
Yeah. So we did partner with Vinetta. We also partnered with Springboard and I Fund Women and several others. So we've really been very deliberate about just improving the network and being out there so people know what we're looking for and that we're open for business. So I think that I was talking a little bit about this before, but these partnerships all start with the understanding that it's hard to collaborate with female founders if you aren't in their networks and they don't know what you're looking for. And so, that really drove the Vinetta partnership, which then has expanded into all of these other relationships that we have. I'll tell you, especially over the last year, my experience and my learning from the founders that we have met through those networks is that the women are absolutely laser focused on their consumer and customer. And, one of the things as I think about the brilliant pivots that we've seen from founders over the last year, all of them started with this, again, laser focus on the consumer or their customer and understanding what in their lives had changed. And whether that's a B2B business or a B2C business, understanding, kind of what their world looks like now and figuring out how your business, your brand can be relevant has really been one of the most inspiring things of the last year is just, seeing the incredible resilience of founders in general and women in specific, but also just the creativity with which they have approached figuring out, how to stay one step above as the world was shifting beneath them. So a pretty amazing year of stories. I'm sure there will be lots of Harvard Business School stories about, the year of COVID and the billions of dollars in value that has been created. So tons of opportunity.
That's great. And Kellen, I know in 2019, Target launched an Accelerator program, I believe, for Gen Z entrepreneurs, really with the idea of making the world a better place. How has that worked out, and any interesting companies that have come out of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have multiple accelerator programs at Target. The Gen Z one has been, it's been very successful. It's a lot of them were companies that may or may not actually ultimately do business with Target, which is atypical for kind of our accelerator programs, but it was very energizing to see how that generation is attacking a lot of global and very specific problems. Like there were adaptive dolls, and so that you could actually see yourself in a doll that maybe you can't see in the dolls that are on shelf today. And so there's been a lot of really interesting companies that have come from that. Another program that we have on the accelerator front is one called Target Takeoff. And Target Takeoff focuses specifically on CPG. And our accelerators team that's in-house partners with a merchant and identifies an area that they're interested in. So Betsy, you're talking about better for you cleaning products. There was one that was more sustainable household essentials. There's been inclusive beauty products. There's been multiple, and it's kind of a crash course in how to do business with Target. So we know a lot of D2C businesses have all this real estate online to tell their story. Well, when they're going up against P&G and others, you have to be able to tell your story on shelf. And it's, how do you communicate that to the guest? And so there's things that we do around packaging where we might have a packaging engineer talk to them about, this is what works on shelf. These are the words that resonate with the guest, those types of things. Here's what it means for supply chain. Here's what when we say lead times, here's what we mean by lead times. When we talk about purchase orders, here's what we mean. So it's really this great crash course for early stage companies. And at the end, they actually do a line review with the merchant. So it fast tracks you into a potential to get on shelf. It's not a guarantee. We don't have a 100% hit rate, but one of the beauty cohorts had a 50% hit rate where they are either going to be carried on shelf or on Target.com. So it really does streamline your way into Target. So the Accelerator programs are very robust, and it's a good way in.
That's awesome. I'm just going to jump in for a second. We too, some of our startups, found their way to the shelves first at Target. And I think as you think about, if you're a founder and you're thinking about, sort of your path to market, we use that term of planning from the store back. And when you're planning from DTC forward, you make very different choices in terms of what your packaging looks like and what your pricing looks like, and the way that you communicate and how important it is or is not to build a community before you get to shelf. And so it's one of the things that we have really been focused on is making sure that we are seeing it on the shelf first, and then almost all of our businesses start direct to consumer, but making sure that they're fit from the beginning to survive on the retail shelf where it's cluttered and it is hard to communicate.
That's great.
Yeah,
both of those great pieces of advice. I touched on this a little bit earlier, and I know it's a question that we get all the time. But are there any tips or tricks for founders, who are listening in terms of, preparing themselves for potential partnership / acquisition? Because it's very hard to get there, and so anything that you've seen that has been successful, would love to hear about that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, start early. Understanding the network and sort of what are your ways into companies that you're interested in. And I remember the last time we were together, I talked about, you really do have to have that vision of, what are the companies that make the most sense for you from an acquisition or a partnership perspective, and then going to school on their business model. How are they doing it? Starting to connect and network with people within the company early, and then just kind of getting tapped into the ecosystem. All of us who are out there doing this work are speaking at events like this and are talking about what our strategies are. And so, as you think about, going to school on companies that you're interested in, I think starting early and then really being methodical about taking the learning and figuring out how your business does or does not fit with their business model. And it's okay if it doesn't work, right? If it's not a fit, and you look at it and you say, oh gosh, whatever, they mostly do fast moving consumables, and I'm all about an app. And so P&G could be, but may not be your very best target from an acquisition standpoint. So anyway, early and often.
And Kellen, what about you?
I totally agree with that. Of one, do your research. So are you, I think one of the biggest pieces is when we meet with people, do they know Target? Did you walk the store? So if you're looking to do business with Target or a partnership or more, just having a baseline understanding of Target, it goes a long way. And so would definitely advise that. Also, adding to what Betsy said, I think really looking at your business model and what makes sense. Does wholesale make sense or not? Margin structure is very different than if you're going to direct to consumer. We launch sometimes where it's a small number of stores, and small to us might be a couple hundred stores, which still feels daunting to most. But you can also get full chain, which is up to roughly 1,900 stores. That's a lot. That takes a lot of investment up front. There's an inventory build that comes with it, but your customer acquisition cost is going to go way down. There's pre-pandemic, we had 30 million people a week walking through the doors of Target. That's actually increased during the pandemic. So you get a lot of people and eyeballs by the nature of Target. But it is not right for everybody. And so doing the homework on what makes sense to you. Then also when you think long-term, is it you want to be acquired, you want to go public? Those types of things can inform what you need to do, and then does it make sense? You do want to partner with a Target or someone similar, or you don't. And I think just as you're taking your rounds of funding, and raise more than you need, raise earlier than you think you need. Don't wait till you're running out of cash, because you're obviously going to be in a much more vulnerable position. But I think, choose your partners, choose someone that is going to really help operationalize you and help you get those connections that you need to meet those plans.
It's great advice. So we are going to, I think we have one last question and then move into Q&A. So any last words of wisdom or advice for founders?
So I would just say two things. Stay true to who you are. A lot of what attracts big retailers and big CPG to businesses, to startups, is your unique voice, your point of view, the guest, the consumer base, the loyalty, the brand you're creating. There's some secret sauce that you have. So stay true to who you are, even throughout all of it. And then this is easier to say than to do, but I think if we learned anything in the pandemic, growth for the sake of growth over potentially being profitable or being a little bit more cautious with your money. I think there's just a balance that, again, easier said than done, and depending on your stage might not be realistic, but I think people are looking for more profitable growth just coming out of all of this.
Absolutely. Betsy?
I'll second that one. Our interest, pretty consistently, again, if you had gone to school on what, where P&G partners and who we've acquired, and we have been much more focused on sustainable growth than we are, sort of growth at any cost is definitely not right for us, not right for our business. We're looking for people who, and businesses that are, that build strength over time and can be profitable, have a good foundation. So that's a big one for us. I guess the only, I commented a little bit about this when I was talking about pivots and things like that. And I guess I would just finish to say that, in many ways, the world has changed forever. And so we're not going back and maybe that's obvious, but thinking about, really what your brand's unique position is in this world, or what it can be, and being really, really deliberate about thinking about where you're going and where the world is going, and what adjustments you might need to make to be viable. I think, I said before, billions of dollars of value are going to be made as people's habits are changing and changing forever. And so understanding those shifts, I think, is probably the most important thing a founder can do right now.
Perfect. No, this is so helpful, and really appreciate the time. So we've had some great audience questions. So I'm going to move into, we'll take a couple of those now. One that we heard from a few people is around CBD. And, I think, Betsy, last year, one of the themes that we had spoken about was sleep. And, with the, I think the rise of the CBD gummy focused on sleep, Martha Stewart came out with her version. Curious for both of your perspective, have you been active in that space, and how you see it evolving over time?
Yeah, for P&G, we have not. And I think until it's federally legal, that will not be a place that P&G will play. I think it's really interesting, and I think the breadth of categories is really interesting. So it'll be one that will play out for us, probably a little bit more conservatively than some other companies.
Kellen?
I mean, I pretty much exactly what Betsy said. I would say, unless it's federally.
Two peas in a pod.
Yes, unless it's federally legal, we will wait on the sidelines for now.
Okay. Great. That's super helpful. Another question is around the predictions for the future of consumer tech, particularly, as we transition into a post-vaccine world. So less around products themselves, but more technology that you think will be super interesting.
I'll tell you, I just, and again, maybe a really obvious, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with where people work, and do people continue to work at home, and for sure those proportions of work from home versus work in the office, again, forever changed. And I think that there will continue to be an opportunity for technology, consumer tech, that makes that better in whatever way, whether you're talking about, sort of how your office runs or how we communicate, or I think that there will continue to be a lot of innovation in that space, because I don't think we're going back.
Agreed. Kellen?
Yeah, same. I think there's been articles that are coming out, not Target related, that have just said like there's pent up demand for going out clothes, right? So I think that there's pent up demand for even like gyms. Like I think people miss the in-person experience, but I think similar to work, I don't think people are going back 100%. So I think that across all aspects of people's lives, like, do you need to go to the movie theater to see something that opened, or can you watch it from the comfort of your house? Like some people like the movie theater, a lot of people don't. And so I think there's a lot across our lives that is changing, and what I do think that there is a fundamental shift on how much more we are comfortable to do at home, and technology is the huge enabler of all of it. So I think that space is only going to continue to grow.
Great. We'll do one last question, actually from Natalie of WinkyLex. So for both of you, do you foresee retailers allocating space specifically for sustainable brands? And in terms of, defining sustainability, what are the parameters around that?
I'll let Kellen take that one.
This is like the $1 million question, or probably multiple $billion question. Yes, I think that you're going to see, and I'm speaking more than just Target. I think that especially the younger generations are much more conscious of this. I think that there is demand. Historically, the issue has been there hasn't been demand, and it's very expensive. So why am I going to pay more for sustainable product or better for you product? I think that we will be seeing a shift. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like anything about global warming has done to people what the pandemic has done as far as changing behaviors. That said, it's going to be, I think, a retailer and a CPG-led thing. We see that the trends on secondhand clothing are just skyrocketing again with the younger generations. That used is very, very mainstay. I think people are now realizing that packaging is a huge contributor to global warming and a problem. I think with the rise of impossible foods and other things, people are starting to realize that maybe the red meat you're eating is also contributing, and so that all aspects of our lives can be cleaned up. I don't know necessarily that it'll be specific, like here's the sustainable pieces. I think you'll start to see it across the assortment of, depending on where you are, like these are sustainable brands, these are sustainable pieces, and I think it'll start to make up more of the portfolio. And again, that's not specific to Target, but I just think that this is an industry thing that will happen over time. It just might not be as fast as all of us now ordering groceries delivered to home because we don't want to touch things.
Right.
I think that one of the things to consider from that standpoint is, I think you're seeing steps taken by almost every brand. You can see, they're just a little bit better. The packaging is now recyclable. They're, getting rid of excess packaging. There's some really interesting stuff. In fact, I just saw some packaging innovation the other day that dissolves in water. there's some really inventive, cool things that people are doing from a packaging perspective. And I think you'll continue to see both manufacturers trying to make those little improvements, every time, a new initiative comes out, really thinking about packaging and how it can be more sustainable, more on refills, things like that I think have been a trend for a while, but are really gaining speed. And I think that retailers will continue to push on manufacturers to do that because that's what consumers are looking for. So I do think that the whole cycle is starting to change, and hopefully we'll see more progress in the years to come.
Yes, we're definitely moving, but hopefully a little faster in the years to come.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it looks like we are coming up on our time. And so sorry if we couldn't get to everyone's questions. Really appreciate Kellen and Betsy, both of you doing this today. It was incredibly informative, and appreciate everyone joining in, and have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thanks for
Good
having
to
us.
see you both.